almost frozen on Christmas Eve, until she pleaded with the cowboy to let her stay in his bed. Emily had been driving through the countryside for hours, eager to reach her family in time for Christmas. She loved the holidays, the warmth of home, the smell of pine, and the laughter that filled the house when everyone gathered together. This year, however, she had decided to make the trip alone. Her car was packed lightly, just a small suitcase in the backseat, a scarf around her neck, and her favorite gloves tucked into the pocket of her coat. She felt confident. She had driven this route before and knew the roads well, or at least she thought she did. By late afternoon, the snow had thickened, and the wind had started to howl. At first, it was only a nuisance, a cold gust that made the windows fog up and forced her to turn on the heater full blast. But soon, it became more serious. The roads grew slick, and visibility dropped with every passing minute. Her car's tires struggled to grip the icy surface, and Emily's heart began to race as she carefully slowed down. She knew she needed to be cautious. A slip on these roads could be dangerous, and she didn't want to take any risks. The sun dipped below the horizon faster than she expected, leaving only a dim twilight behind. The world outside the car seemed to shrink into a white blur. Trees lined the sides of the road, their branches heavy with snow, casting long shadows that danced in the headlights. Emily tried to focus on the road, gripping the steering wheel tightly, but every few minutes she felt a wave of panic wash over her. She was alone, far from any town, and the storm showed no sign of stopping. Then, without warning, her car hit a patch of black ice. The tires slid, spinning her vehicle slightly sideways. She caught it just in time, her hands shaking as adrenaline surged through her body. "Okay, stay calm," she whispered to herself. She knew panicking wouldn't help, but her heart raced like a drum. Minutes later, her car sputtered and coughed before coming to a complete stop. The engine refused to start again. Emily tried the ignition once more, then again, but it was no use. The cold had made the battery sluggish, and she was stuck. She took a deep breath and wrapped her scarf tighter around her neck. She thought about the warmth of her family, the lights on the Christmas tree, the smell of cookies baking in the oven. Those thoughts brought a small comfort, but reality was harsh. The temperature was dropping fast, and she could feel the chill seeping into her bones. Her hands, even inside gloves, felt numb. Her toes pressed against the frozen soles of her shoes, and her nose stung from the icy wind. She knew she needed shelter, somewhere to escape the cold, and fast. Emily stepped out of the car, the snow crunching loudly under her boots. The wind hit her immediately, cutting through her coat and scarf like tiny knives. She hugged herself, shivering uncontrollably. Every breath was visible in the freezing air, and every movement felt heavier than it should. She looked around. There was nothing for miles except the road she had come from and the trees that lined it. No houses, no lights, nothing that suggested safety. A wave of fear hit her full force. "I can't be out here, she whispered almost to herself. She walked slowly along the side of the road, hoping to spot any sign of life. The snow had started falling again, heavier now, clinging to her hair and coat. Her boots sank into the drifts, making every step a struggle. Each gust of wind made her shiver violently, and her body began to ache from the cold. She wrapped her arms tightly around herself, but it was barely enough. Her teeth chattered despite her efforts, and tears pricked the corners of her eyes, not from sadness, but from the raw, biting cold. After what felt like an eternity, Emily saw a faint glimmer in the distance. At first, she thought it might be a trick of her eyes, a reflection off the snow. But as she squinted, she realized it was light, warm, golden light. Her heart leapt with hope. She trudged toward it, each step a battle against the snow and wind. The light grew brighter, revealing the outline of a small building tucked between two tall pines. It was a cabin, simple and unassuming, but in that moment it was the most welcoming sight she had ever seen. She moved faster, almost running, but her legs felt like lead. By the time she reached the cabin, her hair was damp with snow, her gloves soaked, and her face red from the cold. She pounded on the door with numb fingers, the sound echoing into the silent night. "Hello? Anyone there?" she called, her voice hoarse and trembling. She waited, holding her breath, hoping that someone would answer. Her teeth chattered and her arms shook, but she couldn't stop herself from pleading silently for help. Minutes passed, and the wind howled around her like an angry storm spirit. Emily felt despair creeping in. What if no one was home? What if she had to spend the night out here in the freezing cold with no protection? The thought made her stomach twist, and her eyes filled with tears she couldn't control. Just as she was about to turn away in hopelessness, the door creaked open. A man appeared in the doorway, a tall, rugged figure with a calm but watchful gaze. His coat was thick, and a hat shielded him from the snow. "Hey," he said, his voice steady. "What are you doing out here in this weather?" Emily could barely speak, the words stuck in her throat as she tried to explain. "My car broke down, I don't know what to do, I'm so cold," she managed to gasp. The man studied her, noting the red cheeks, the chattering teeth, and the desperate look in her eyes. Without a word, he stepped aside, motioning for her to come in. Emily's relief was immediate, almost overwhelming. She stepped inside, shaking from head to toe, grateful for the warmth that hit her the moment she crossed the threshold. The cabin smelled of wood and a faint hint of something sweet, like cinnamon or baked bread. A fire crackled in the hearth, sending waves of heat into the room. Emily sank toward it, feeling her frozen fingers begin to thaw. The man introduced himself as Luke, and although he seemed quiet, there was a kindness in his eyes. Emily explained in short, rushed sentences what had happened. Luke listened patiently, nodding occasionally, his gaze calm and reassuring. The storm outside continued to rage, snow piling up against the walls of the cabin, but inside there was safety. For the first time since her car broke down, Emily felt the panic start to ease. She wasn't out there alone anymore. As she warmed herself by the fire, Emily couldn't help but think how fragile life could be. Just hours ago, she had been confident, driving along roads she thought she knew. Now she was stranded, nearly frozen, saved only by the kindness of a stranger. She reflected on the way the wind had cut through her coat, how each step had felt like wading through ice, and how close she had been to losing hope. It made her appreciate warmth, shelter, and human kindness in a way she never had before. The night outside grew darker, the snow heavier, and Emily realized that if Luke hadn't been there, she might still be wandering in the storm. Every muscle in her body ached from the cold, but inside the cabin, surrounded by the glow of the fire, she finally felt safe enough to breathe. She wrapped her arms around herself, still shivering slightly, but with a spark of hope growing in her chest. That Christmas Eve, Emily learned something important. Life could change in a moment, and people, even strangers, could make the difference between despair and comfort. She didn't know how long the night would last or what the hours ahead would bring, but for now, she was alive, warm, and most importantly, safe. And that small cabin, standing alone in the snow, had become her haven in a world that had suddenly felt overwhelmingly cold. Emily stepped fully into the cabin, the warmth immediately washing over her like a gentle wave. She could feel her frozen fingers starting to regain feeling, her stiff legs relaxing slightly, and her chattering teeth slowing. The cabin was small but cozy, built from thick logs that had darkened with age. The fire in the stone hearth crackled softly, sending sparks dancing up the chimney and filling the room with a golden glow. Everything smelled faintly of pine and wood smoke, mixed with a comforting hint of something sweet, perhaps baked bread or a lingering holiday spice. Her eyes wandered around the room, taking in the simple furnishings. A wooden table sat in the corner, neatly stacked with a few chairs. A small bookshelf held a modest collection of books, their spines faded from use. On the walls, A few framed pictures depicted landscapes of snow-covered mountains and wide-open fields. The cabin had a quiet charm, a sense of calm and simplicity that Emily found immediately comforting after the chaos outside. She sank onto a chair near the fire, rubbing her hands together and letting the heat seep in. The man who had opened the door, Luke, stood nearby, watching her with quiet curiosity. He was tall and rugged, dressed in a thick coat and hat that seemed perfectly suited to the harsh winter outside. His eyes, sharp yet gentle, took in Emily's frozen appearance. "Sit by the fire," he said simply. "You look like you've been through a storm." Emily nodded, grateful for the words and the safety they implied. She wanted to speak, to explain everything, but the cold had stolen her voice. She could only manage a quiet, "Thank you." Luke moved around the cabin with ease, moving a few logs in the fireplace to make it burn brighter. Emily could see that he was used to living alone in this remote place. Everything he did was deliberate, efficient, and practical. He handed her a cup of tea, steaming hot, and Emily took it with trembling hands. She brought it to her lips and sipped cautiously. The warmth of the liquid spread through her chest, calming her shivering body and bringing a small sense of relief. She felt herself slowly returning to life after the long struggle in the snow. While she drank, Emily tried to piece together her thoughts. Her car had broken down far from any help. The storm had picked up unexpectedly, and she had wandered through the snow hoping to find shelter. Now, she was in this cabin in front of a fire with a stranger who had offered her warmth and safety. It felt surreal, almost like a scene from a storybook rather than her own life. She realized how vulnerable she had been, and a wave of gratitude washed over her. She had almost been frozen in the middle of nowhere, and yet here she was, safe and alive. Luke, noticing her attempt to calm down, spoke gently. "You shouldn't be out there alone. It's dangerous in this weather." His voice was low and steady, the kind of voice that didn't rush or judge but carried authority and reassurance at the same time. Emily nodded, her fingers still wrapped around the cup of tea. She wanted to explain more, to tell him how scared she had been, but the words didn't come easily. Her teeth were still slightly chattering, and the warmth of the fire was only beginning to reach her frozen toes. "Did you drive far?" Luke asked after a moment, breaking the silence. Emily took a deep breath, realizing she needed to speak. "Yes, I was going to my family's home for Christmas," she said slowly. "I didn't think the roads would be this bad, and then my car just stopped. I couldn't get it started again." Her voice cracked slightly, but she continued, describing her trek through the snow and the hopeless feeling of being stranded. Luke listened carefully, nodding occasionally but saying little. His calm presence made Emily feel safe enough to speak without fear. As she spoke, she noticed how detailed his cabin was despite its simplicity. Every object seemed to have a place, every corner organized. There were tools neatly stacked on a rack by the door, a small woodpile ready for the fire, and even a basket of extra blankets near the hearth. It was clear that Luke lived alone in the wilderness, prepared for whatever challenges the winter could bring. Emily felt a sense of admiration and respect. He wasn't just a man surviving, he was thriving in a place that most people would never dare to enter. After a while, Luke moved toward the bedroom area and returned with an extra blanket. "Here," he said, offering it to Emily. "Wrap yourself in this. It'll help with the cold." Emily accepted gratefully, feeling the thick, soft fabric against her skin. She wrapped it around herself tightly, savoring the warmth that slowly crept through her body. The blanket was more than a piece of cloth. It was a symbol of human kindness, a shield against the harshness of the outside world. For a few moments, they sat in silence, listening to the wind howling against the cabin walls. The snow was still falling heavily, each gust making the small structure shake slightly. Emily felt a strange mix of fear and comfort. Fear because the storm outside was relentless, and comfort because she was no longer alone to face it. Luke's presence was reassuring, a steady force in the middle of chaos. She realized that the kindness of a stranger had changed her entire night, turning what could have been a disaster into a chance for safety and human connection. As the night deepened, Emily knew she had to ask a difficult question. The cabin was small and she had nowhere else to go. She hesitated but finally spoke. I don't want to impose, but is there any chance I could stay here for the night? I just need to get warm. I promise I'll leave first thing in the morning. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper, but filled with urgency. She saw a flicker of thought cross Luke's face. The request was unusual, but it was clear she was sincere and truly in need. Luke looked at her carefully. His eyes softened slightly as he considered her words. "The cabin's small," he said after a pause, "but I can't let you freeze outside. You can stay, just for the night." Relief flooded Emily's chest, almost knocking the breath out of her. "Thank you," she whispered, barely able to contain the gratitude that surged through her. It was more than just the warmth of the cabin she felt. It was the warmth of being cared for, of someone seeing her need and responding without hesitation. Luke gestured toward the bed, explaining that she could share it for the night. Emily felt a mix of embarrassment and relief. She had never imagined herself in this situation, but the alternative, facing the night alone in the freezing snow, was unthinkable. Slowly, carefully, she moved toward the bed, the blanket still wrapped around her. Luke stayed nearby, giving her space but also ensuring she was safe and comfortable. The trust that grew between them in those few minutes was quiet but powerful, an unspoken bond formed by circumstance and human decency. As Emily settled into the bed, pulling the blanket over her shoulders, she reflected on how unpredictable life could be. Hours ago, she had been confident, driving along a familiar road, thinking everything was under control. Now she had been forced to rely on a stranger for survival. Yet in that reliance, she had found something unexpected: comfort, safety, and the simple beauty of kindness. She realized that life often placed people in situations that tested them, but also reminded them of the goodness in others. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside, the cabin was calm. The fire flickered softly, casting shadows on the walls, and the wind howled against the logs, but Emily felt herself finally relaxing. She could feel the warmth spreading through her body, the fear of the night slowly receding. In that moment, she understood that survival was not just about enduring the cold, but about finding connection and trust, even in the most unlikely places. Luke sat quietly by the fire, tending the logs and ensuring the flames stayed strong. Emily watched him for a moment, realizing that this man, this quiet cowboy who had opened his home to a stranger in the middle of a blizzard, was extraordinary in his own way. It wasn't just the act of offering shelter. It was the calm, steady, and reassuring manner in which he did it. He had a presence that made the cabin feel like a safe haven, a place where fear and despair could not survive. That night, Emily fell asleep wrapped in warmth, both physical and emotional. The snow outside covered the world in white, relentless and cold, but inside the cabin, a different story was unfolding. One of compassion, human kindness, and the quiet strength of someone willing to help another in need. She knew she would never forget this Christmas Eve, a night that began with fear and ended with safety, comfort, and a renewed faith in the goodness of people. The night outside had deepened, the storm showing no sign of letting up. Emily sat on the edge of the bed, wrapped tightly in the thick blanket Luke had given her. The warmth from the fire and the blanket was slowly melting the chill from her body, but her mind still raced with fear and gratitude. She was alive, safe from the snow and the cold, yet the situation still felt surreal. Only a few hours ago, she had been alone, lost in the middle of a vast, frozen landscape, and now she was inside someone else's home, relying entirely on a stranger. She tried to calm herself by taking slow, deep breaths, focusing on the sound of the fire crackling in the hearth. It was a simple, steady sound, but it reminded her that she was no longer alone in the wilderness. Luke had gone about his chores quietly, checking the fire, adding more wood, making sure the cabin remained warm. There was a calm efficiency in everything he did, and Emily found herself admiring the way he moved through his space. He seemed completely at ease here, at home in the snow, while she had struggled to survive even a few minutes outside. But the thought of spending the night alone in the cabin was still intimidating. The bed was small, the cabin private but rustic, and Emily could feel the awkwardness pressing against her. She hesitated, unsure how to ask what she needed most. The night was freezing, and she could still feel the cold seeping into her fingers and toes despite the blankets. She wanted to get warm, to feel the security of a proper bed, but she didn't want to overstep any boundaries. She had never been in a situation like this before, where her survival depended on someone else's generosity. Her shivering reminded her that she could not wait any longer. She finally gathered the courage to speak, her voice soft but urgent. I know this is strange," she began, choosing her words carefully. "I don't mean to intrude, but I'm so cold. I don't have anywhere else to go. Could I please stay here in the bed for the night, just until morning? I promise I'll leave as soon as it's safe." Her words came out in a rush, almost like a prayer. She looked at Luke, her eyes wide with hope and fear, silently pleading for his understanding. Luke paused, standing near the fire with a log in his hand. He studied her, his brow furrowed slightly as he considered her request. His silence felt long to Emily, every second stretching as she waited for his response. She could feel the tension in the room, but she also sensed the kindness in his gaze. He wasn't dismissive or judgmental. He was simply weighing the situation carefully, as anyone would when faced with an unexpected and delicate request. Finally, after what felt like an eternity to Emily, Luke spoke. "The cabin's small," he said slowly, "and the bed, well, it's just mine, but I can't let you freeze outside. You can stay for the night." Relief flooded through Emily's chest so intensely that she almost gasped out loud. She felt a lump in her throat as the tension and fear she had carried for hours began to dissolve. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the crackling fire. The gratitude in her tone was genuine, overflowing, and impossible to hide. Luke gestured toward the bed, his manner calm but reassuring. "Just for the night, that's all. You'll be safe, but you'll have to leave when the morning comes." Emily nodded eagerly, wrapping the blanket even tighter around herself. The thought of warmth, rest, and protection from the storm was almost too good to be true. She felt tears prick the corners of her eyes, not from sadness but from relief. The fear that had haunted her since the car broke down was finally beginning to lift, replaced by a sense of security she hadn't felt in hours. As she moved toward the bed, Emily couldn't help but notice the simplicity of Luke's life. The cabin was modest, practical, and functional. Every object had a purpose. A stack of firewood neatly arranged by the wall, blankets folded with care, a few personal items set on a shelf. It was clear that Luke had built his life around the harshness of winter and the solitude of the wilderness. There was no clutter, no unnecessary items, just warmth, order, and readiness for the challenges that came with living so far from civilization. Emily climbed onto the bed carefully, still clutching the blanket around her shoulders. Luke stayed nearby, maintaining a respectful distance but ensuring she felt safe. There was an unspoken understanding between them. She needed warmth and safety, and he was willing to provide it. In that quiet moment, Emily realized how rare acts of kindness like this could be. Here was a man who had no obligation to help her, yet he had chosen to do so simply because it was the right thing. The fire crackled softly as Emily settled in, pulling the blanket over her shoulders and tucking it around her feet. She felt the warmth spread gradually through her body, the tension and numbness slowly giving way to comfort. For the first time in hours, she could breathe without the sharp sting of cold in her lungs. Her hands, still slightly stiff, began to regain feeling, and her muscles relaxed as the warmth of the fire and the blanket worked their magic. She looked at Luke, noticing the quiet strength in his presence. He moved with calm confidence, stacking logs and tending to the fire, but there was also a gentleness in the way he treated the cabin and her. Emily realized that he embodied both resilience and kindness, a rare combination that made her feel not only safe but understood. She had never imagined that someone she had just met could make such a difference in her life in such a short time. As the storm outside continued, Emily began to speak more freely. She told Luke about her journey, about the excitement she had felt leaving home that morning, and how quickly it had turned into fear and uncertainty. She described the roads, the snow, and the moment her car had stopped, leaving her stranded in the cold. Luke listened patiently, nodding occasionally but saying little. His calm presence allowed her to speak without judgment, and she felt a strange sense of relief in sharing her story with someone who seemed to understand without needing every detail. The conversation eventually turned to more ordinary topics, allowing Emily to regain some normalcy despite the extraordinary circumstances. She and Luke talked about the winter weather, the beauty of the snow-covered landscape, and the solitude of living in such a remote place. Even in the midst of a terrifying night, these small exchanges brought comfort and a sense of human connection. Emily found herself smiling occasionally, the warmth of the cabin matched by a warmth in her heart that had nothing to do with the fire. After a while, Emily realized just how tired she was. The events of the day, the drive, the storm, the fear of being stranded, had taken a toll on her both physically and emotionally. Yet the safety of the cabin and the kindness of Luke gave her a rare peace. She knew she could sleep without fear, something she hadn't felt in hours. Slowly, she laid back on the bed, wrapping the blanket around herself completely. She felt the tension melt away as her body surrendered to warmth and security. Luke moved quietly around the cabin, making sure the fire stayed strong and the cabin remained comfortable. He offered a reassuring glance before settling near the hearth, keeping a watchful eye without intruding. There was an unspoken trust between them, a recognition that both were acting with honesty and care. Emily felt grateful not only for the physical warmth he provided, but also for the sense of safety and respect that came with it. As the hours passed, Emily drifted into a light sleep, occasionally waking to the sound of the wind howling outside. Each time she woke, she felt the comfort of the cabin and the warmth of the blanket, and the fear that had gripped her earlier seemed to fade further. She realized that sometimes the kindness of a stranger could mean the difference between despair and hope, between fear and comfort. That night, in a small cabin in the middle of a snowstorm, Emily experienced that truth firsthand. The night stretched on, the storm relentless, but Emily felt protected. The cabin, the fire, and Luke's quiet presence formed a shield against the harsh winter world outside. She reflected on her journey, her fear, and the unexpected turn of events that had led her here. It was a night of vulnerability, yes, but also of trust, compassion, and the human capacity to care for others in their moment of need. As she finally sank into deeper sleep, Emily knew that this Christmas Eve, which had begun with danger and fear, had turned into something extraordinary. It was a night she would never forget, a night defined not by the storm, but by the warmth, kindness, and humanity she had found in the most unlikely place. The memory of being almost frozen outside, followed by the comfort and safety of the cabin, would stay with her forever, a testament to the power of compassion and the quiet strength of strangers who choose to help. By the time Emily woke again, the storm outside had grown even stronger, rattling the cabin windows and piling snow high against the logs. Inside, however, the warmth of the fire and the blanket wrapped tightly around her made her feel almost like she was in a different world, one far away from the cold and danger outside. She stretched lightly, still feeling the stiffness from the freezing temperatures of the night, but also a sense of comfort and safety she hadn't experienced in hours. The reality of her situation, being alone in a snowstorm and relying entirely on a stranger, was still present in her mind, but it had been softened by the kind and quiet presence of Luke. Luke was already moving around the cabin, quietly tending the fire and adding more wood to keep it burning steadily. His movements were calm, deliberate, and practiced, showing that he was used to living in the wilderness and dealing with whatever winter might throw at him. Emily watched him for a moment, realizing that he had not only offered her shelter but had done so without complaint or hesitation. There was a quiet confidence in his actions, a sense that he was in complete control of his surroundings even as the storm raged outside. She felt a small flicker of admiration and gratitude. She took a sip of the warm tea he had prepared for her, feeling the liquid slide down her throat and spread warmth through her chest. Every sip seemed to chase away a little more of the lingering cold that had settled into her bones. The fire crackled softly, the sound almost meditative, filling the room with gentle, reassuring noise. She took a deep breath and realized that she could finally relax, that she was no longer fighting to survive, but could rest and regain her strength. Yet, even with the warmth, Emily knew she could not stay in the chair by the fire all night. Her body still needed proper rest, and her muscles ached from hours of exposure to the cold. With a nervous glance at Luke, she decided to bring up the question that had been on her mind since she entered the cabin. She hesitated at first, unsure how to phrase it without seeming impolite or intrusive, but her need was urgent and she finally found the courage to speak. "Luke, I don't want to make you uncomfortable," she began softly, her voice almost a whisper, "but I'm still really cold. I don't know how I could survive another hour outside or even on the floor here. Would it be okay if I shared your bed tonight, just until morning?" She looked at him pleadingly, her eyes wide, filled with the raw honesty of her fear. She felt a shiver run through her, both from cold and nervousness, as she waited for his answer. Luke studied her carefully, his eyes scanning her face as if searching for signs of exaggeration or deceit. But all he saw was truth, a young woman exhausted and freezing, pleading for warmth and safety. He thought for a moment, weighing the situation. The cabin was his home, his private space, but he could not let her freeze outside. Her words carried no ulterior motive, only a desperate need to survive the night. Finally, he nodded. "All right," he said slowly, his voice steady and calm. "You can share the bed, but just for the night, that's all. When morning comes, you'll have to leave." Relief swept over Emily in a powerful wave, almost knocking the breath out of her. She felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes as gratitude surged through her body. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. The words barely seemed enough to express how thankful she was, but Luke gave no indication that it mattered. He simply nodded and gestured toward the bed. Emily moved carefully toward the bed, still wrapped in the thick blanket, feeling a mix of embarrassment and relief. She had never imagined herself in a situation like this, sharing a bed with a man she had just met, but she knew that she had no other choice. The alternative, remaining in the freezing cabin or worse, venturing back into the storm, was unthinkable. She climbed in slowly, pulling the blanket over her shoulders and curling up as best she could. The warmth from the mattress, the blankets, and the fire quickly began to seep into her body, relaxing her stiff muscles and calming her racing heart. Luke stayed nearby, moving around the cabin quietly, tending to the fire and making sure everything remained safe and comfortable. His presence was calm and steady, reassuring without being intrusive. Emily realized that this unspoken care, the way he had offered her warmth, prepared the fire, and allowed her to rest, was more than just physical comfort. It was a kind of emotional safety, a feeling that she could trust someone in a moment of vulnerability. She had almost forgotten what it felt like to be cared for in such a selfless way. As she settled in, Emily allowed herself to reflect on the events that had brought her here. The drive through the snow, the car breaking down, the hours of fear and uncertainty, they all seemed distant now, softened by the warmth of the cabin. She thought about the roads she had traveled, the icy patches that had almost caused her to lose control, and the despair that had threatened to overwhelm her. Each memory was tinged with fear, but now it was also filled with relief, gratitude, and a sense of wonder at how quickly circumstances could change. The storm outside continued, the wind howling against the logs and snow piling up against the cabin walls. Yet inside, the fire burned steadily, filling the room with light and heat. Emily listened to the crackling of the logs, the occasional pop as a spark leapt upward, and felt herself relaxing further. The small details, the soft glow of the fire, the warmth of the blankets, the quiet presence of someone willing to help, became anchors of safety in the otherwise harsh world outside. After a while, Emily began to speak more freely. She told Luke about her family, the excitement she had felt leaving home, and her plans for Christmas morning. She shared memories of past holidays, little traditions she cherished, and the simple joys that made the season special. Luke listened quietly, offering the occasional nod or gentle word of encouragement. Emily realized that in this strange, remote cabin, far from the bustle of the city and the world she knew, she had found not just safety but also connection. Luke, in turn, began to share a few stories from his own life. He spoke of winters spent on the ranch, tending to animals and braving the cold for months at a time. He described the solitude, the beauty of snow-covered fields, and the quiet peace that came from living close to nature. Emily listened intently, fascinated by his experiences, and felt a growing sense of respect for the life he had chosen. Despite the harshness of winter, Luke had created a world of warmth, order, and self-reliance, a stark contrast to the fear and uncertainty she had faced earlier in the day. As the night went on, the conversation faded, replaced by the comfortable silence that only comes with trust and shared understanding. Emily felt the last remnants of fear slip away, replaced by a sense of calm and belonging. The blankets cocooned her body, the fire filled the room with warmth, and Luke's quiet presence reassured her that she was safe. She realized that survival wasn't just about escaping the cold. It was about finding trust, kindness, and human connection in the midst of uncertainty. Eventually, Emily allowed herself to sink fully into the bed, curling under the blankets as the warmth enveloped her completely. The storm outside continued to rage, but inside, she felt protected. Each breath became slower, more relaxed, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to feel truly at ease. The fear that had gripped her during the long hours outside melted into the background, replaced by gratitude, comfort, and a newfound understanding of human kindness. Luke continued his quiet work near the fire, moving with calm precision but also giving her the space she needed. There was no rush, no judgment, only the steady, reassuring presence of someone who had chosen to help a stranger in need. Emily realized that it was not just the fire or the blankets that provided warmth, but the care and compassion that Luke had shown throughout the evening. It was a reminder that even in the harshest conditions, people could offer light and comfort to those in need. As the night wore on, Emily drifted into a peaceful sleep, the warmth of the cabin and the safety of the bed enveloping her completely. Outside, the storm continued, relentless and fierce, but inside there was calm. The crackling fire, the soft glow of the cabin, and the quiet presence of someone who had opened his home to her created a sanctuary from the harsh world beyond. She knew she would never forget this night, the fear, the relief, and the unexpected kindness that had saved her from the cold. In those quiet, long hours, Emily learned an important truth. Sometimes, survival depended not only on courage and preparation, but on the generosity and empathy of others. Luke's actions had given her more than physical warmth. They had provided emotional safety, reassurance, and hope. She realized that human connection, even with strangers, could be as vital as a fire in a storm, and that trust and kindness could make the difference between despair and comfort. By the time the first light of morning began to filter through the snowy windows, Emily felt fully rested, her body warmed and her spirit lifted. She had faced the harshest night of her life, yet she had emerged not only alive but profoundly grateful. The storm had tested her resilience, but it had also shown her the extraordinary capacity for kindness that existed in the world. And in that small, quiet cabin, amidst the snow and the cold, she had experienced a Christmas Eve unlike any other, one that would stay with her forever. Morning light slowly crept through the frosted windows of the cabin. Emily awoke to a soft glow illuminating the room, the fire reduced to glowing embers but still warm enough to make the cabin comfortable. The storm from the night before had finally begun to subside, the wind softer, the snowfall lighter. For the first time in what felt like a very long night, Emily felt completely rested. Her body, once stiff and chilled to the bone, now felt loose and comfortable. She stretched her arms slowly under the blankets, savoring the warmth and the safety she had experienced all night. As she opened her eyes, Emily noticed Luke moving quietly around the cabin, tending to the fire and preparing a small breakfast. The aroma of something warm and comforting, perhaps porridge or toasted bread, filled the air, mingling with the lingering smell of pine and wood smoke. Emily smiled, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. This man, who had been a stranger only hours ago, had not only offered her shelter from the storm but had also provided warmth, comfort, and even food. She realized that this Christmas Eve had become more than a story of survival. It had become a story of human kindness and connection. She sat up slowly, careful not to disturb the blankets too much, and took a moment to look around the cabin. Everything seemed even more welcoming in the morning light. The walls, lined with wood and simple decorations, now appeared cozy and inviting rather than stark. The small fire crackled softly, casting a golden glow over the room. Luke moved with calm precision, stacking a few logs and checking the small kitchen area. Emily watched him for a moment, struck again by the quiet strength and self-sufficiency he possessed. It was clear he had spent many winters here alone, relying on his own skills and instincts to survive. Emily felt a wave of appreciation for Luke's generosity. She thought back to the night, the snowstorm, the freezing temperatures, the fear and panic that had gripped her, and marveled at how drastically her circumstances had changed. Only hours ago, she had been wandering in the snow, teeth chattering, shivering, unsure if she would find shelter in time. Now she was warm, fed, and safe, sitting in a cabin filled with light and human kindness. She realized that this experience would remain with her for the rest of her life, a powerful reminder of the goodness that could exist even in the most unexpected places. Luke noticed her awake and offered a quiet smile. "Morning," he said simply, his voice calm and friendly. "How are you feeling?" Emily responded with a smile of her own, still wrapped in the blanket, feeling the warmth spread through her body. "Much better, thanks to you," she said. Her words were sincere, full of gratitude. She paused for a moment, reflecting on how to express her thanks properly. "I honestly don't know how to thank you enough. Last night, I don't think I could have made it without your help." Luke shook his head slightly, his expression modest. "You would have done the same for someone else," he said quietly. "I just made sure you didn't have to face the storm alone." Emily could sense the honesty in his words. He wasn't boasting and he wasn't trying to impress her. He was simply stating the truth. And yet the impact of his actions had been profound. Emily realized that sometimes kindness didn't need to be grand or heroic. It could simply be the quiet, selfless decision to help someone in need. After a moment, Emily got out of bed and began to stretch her limbs. She felt the stiffness in her legs from the cold of the previous night gradually melt away, replaced by warmth and comfort. The blankets had done their job well, and her body was finally feeling like herself again. She glanced around the cabin once more, noticing the care that Luke had taken in preparing everything for the night. The firewood neatly stacked, the extra blankets folded, the tea she had drunk to warm herself. It was all evidence of a man who understood not just survival, but the importance of kindness. Luke moved to the small stove in the corner, checking a pot of porridge. The smell filled the cabin, inviting and warm. Emily could see the way he worked, methodical, deliberate, and efficient. He stirred the pot, added a few spices, and then set out 2 bowls with simple but thoughtful care. Emily felt touched by this gesture. Even though he had just met her, he had gone out of his way to make her feel comfortable and cared for. It was a level of generosity that Emily had rarely encountered, and it made her feel incredibly lucky to have found him and his cabin in the middle of the snowstorm. As they ate breakfast together, Emily found herself asking questions about Luke's life, genuinely curious about the man who had offered her refuge. He spoke quietly about the challenges of living in the wilderness, about the long winters and the isolation, but also about the beauty of the land and the satisfaction of living close to nature. Emily listened intently, fascinated by his stories, and realized that his life, though different from her own, was filled with a sense of purpose and resilience that she admired deeply. There was something comforting in hearing about the routines and the care he had put into making the cabin not just functional, but a safe and welcoming place. After breakfast, Emily helped Luke clear the table and tidy up the cabin, feeling a small but meaningful sense of contribution. Even though she had been the one rescued, participating in these simple tasks made her feel more at ease and less like a guest imposing on his space. Luke accepted her help graciously, his demeanor calm and warm. There was no rush, no tension, just 2 people quietly working side by side, forming a bond that had started in the most unlikely of circumstances. Eventually, the time came for Emily to leave. The storm had subsided enough to make the roads passable, and she knew she needed to continue her journey to her family. She stood at the doorway, the crisp morning air brushing against her face. The snow still blanketed the world, glinting in the soft light of the sun, but the fear that had gripped her the night before was gone, replaced by a sense of hope and gratitude. She turned to Luke, her eyes reflecting both relief and appreciation. "I can't thank you enough," she said again, her voice steady now but full of emotion. "Last night you saved me. I don't know what I would have done without you." Luke gave her a small, humble nod. "You made it through," he said simply. "That's what matters." Emily smiled, understanding that his words were true, but that his actions had meant far more than any simple acknowledgement. She felt a deep sense of respect for him and the kindness he had shown in a moment when she had needed it most. Before leaving, Emily took a moment to look around the cabin one last time. The small, warm space that had been her sanctuary during the storm now seemed almost magical in the soft morning light. Every detail, the fire, the blankets, the careful organization of the cabin, spoke of a life built on resilience, preparation, and care for others. Emily felt profoundly grateful, realizing that this experience had taught her more than just the importance of survival. It had shown her the impact of compassion, trust, and selflessness. As she walked back toward the road, Emily felt the weight of the night lift from her shoulders. The snow crunched under her boots, the world was quiet and serene, and the sun glinted off the frozen branches of the trees. She felt alive, safe, and more connected to the world around her than she had in a long time. The storm that had threatened to overwhelm her had instead brought her to a place of warmth, kindness, and reflection. She carried the memory of Luke's generosity and the safety of the cabin with her, knowing that it would stay with her forever. The drive to her family's home was smooth and calm, the roads clearer now that the worst of the storm had passed. As she drove, Emily reflected on the events of the night, the fear, the struggle, the relief, and the kindness she had received. She realized that this Christmas Eve had been unlike any other. It was not the decorations, the gifts, or even the familiar faces that made it memorable, but the unexpected generosity of a stranger who had seen a person in need and chosen to act. By the time she arrived at her family's home, the sun was high in the sky, and the world felt bright and full of promise. Emily was greeted with warmth, laughter, and love, but her thoughts kept returning to Luke and the small cabin in the snow. She knew she would tell her family the story, not as a tale of fear or danger, but as a story of human kindness and the quiet strength of someone who had offered refuge when it was needed most. That Christmas, Emily learned an important lesson about the power of compassion. She had faced the harshest cold, the loneliness of a snowstorm, and the fear of being stranded, yet through it all, she had encountered generosity, trust, and warmth. It was a reminder that sometimes the greatest gifts were not found under a tree, but in the actions of others, the willingness to help, the patience to listen, and the courage to open one's home and heart to a stranger in need. As she settled in with her family that evening, surrounded by the familiar comforts of home, Emily felt a quiet joy. The memory of the storm, the cabin, and Luke's kindness remained vivid in her mind, a reminder of the unexpected ways in which people can touch each other's lives. She knew that she would never forget that Christmas Eve, the night she had almost frozen, and the night she had been saved by the generosity of a compassionate stranger. It was a story she would carry with her forever, a story of survival, trust, and the quiet magic of human kindness.